We're good. Let's go for it.
I'm going to go back to share. Are y'all seeing that now?
Yes.
Okay. So just as a recap, some of the things we talked about last time, because I don't know if Stacy was here. I think Stacy missed Tuesday. So just as a recap, this is kind of the general navigation. Shows here that we're logged into the Schuyler Public Library survey. There's a survey list where you can look at previous year surveys if you wanted to print those or look at those. Frequently asked questions, the survey instructions are also embedded in the survey itself. There's a show status button that we'll get to at the end. Print icon if you want to print your survey when it's completed. The submit button, after we get to the end of the survey, we can hit that. And then a save button just saves the data that we entered on this page. There's also this hide last year's answers and show last year's answers. I almost always turn the show last year's answers on, just because then it gives you an idea of what you entered last year and you can kind of compare that to the data that you're entering in the current year. One more thing to recap, the purple questions are the federally required ones. So these questions here are ones that are asked by IMLS. The ones that aren't in purple, that are in black, are either questions, maybe we want more detail than what IMLS is asking for, or these are things that we think that are important to collect on the state level. You also have the flag question here where you can flag a question, come back later if you to jog your memory. When you go to submit, it'll indicate that you flagged some questions. You can just turn that on or off. And then you can also enter a note. You can also enter notes during the show status button here at the end if you get an edit check. Like if your data is outside of a certain range, if you've had a large change, or if you've had no change, if it's exactly the same, you'll get an edit check and you need to enter a note. If you know that it's outside that range and you want to enter a note here, you can. Usually on the purple questions, we recommend that since those are federal questions, that you enter a note in the federal note field. State, if it's a state question, you can enter a state note here. You can also enter a local note. Typically, these are things like, here's where I got the data from. So that would jog your memory in the next year. If it's something that recurs every year, like the $500 overdrive fee is one example that comes up every year because it's always $500. You can just copy and paste your note from the prior year there. Okay, so let's move on to programs. So here's where we left off last time. We were in the program section, and we were talking first about children's programs. This question asks, how many children's programs did you offer? And there's a couple things to note here. For one is the age. The definition that we use here is these are programs that the primary intended audience is persons age 11 years and under. So even though you might have young adults or adults that attend those programs, if they're designed, if that's your primary audience, that's what you count as a program, a children's program. The other thing to keep in mind is that for programs in a series, you count every program in that series. The example given here is if you have a story hour, it's the same program every week, but you offer it 48 weeks a year, you count that as 48 programs, even though it's the same program every week. The other thing to note is for the average attendance here, you count everyone that shows up at this children's program. So if you have a story time for toddlers and you have 5 toddlers and 5 parents that show up for that program, you count that as 10 for the attendance. So you count everyone that shows up at that program, regardless of their age. It's kind of a bit of reverse engineering here because Biblostat calculates the total, which is the number of programs times your average attendance. So if you had this number, you would just subtract or divide 5.25 by your total to get your average attendance here. And I've had some suggestions of people saying that we rework that. So it's the other way around, that we enter the total and then it calculates the average, but that might be something that we would look into next year for that. But it's a simple equation. So then here, for early literacy, what we're asking for in this question, this is a state level question, is what we want to know is out of these, like say last year, there were 134 children's programs. What we're asking here is out of those 134 children's programs, were any of them specifically designed for a pre-K audience? So from birth to 5 years old, pre-K. And if it's yes, then we want to know how many of those. So like for last year, it looks like out of that 134, almost half of them were early literacy programs. And then we want to know what the average attendance was for the early literacy programs, and then Bibliostat automatically calculates the total here. So then we move on to young adult programs. So those are defined as programs where your primary audience is ages 12 through 18. Again, if you have young adult programs, you count everyone that's in attendance. So if you have a young adult, say you have a 15-year-old and they bring their 10-year-old sister and their mom to the program, that would count as 3 attendees to that program. You count everybody that shows up. Again, with the series, you count it the same way as you do a children's program. If you have the same, if you have a book club here as the example, it's offered 24 weeks a year, that counts as 24 programs, even though it's the same program every week. You count them all in a series. So let's click on next here, and that should take us to adult programs. Again, you count those just like you would the others, with adult being the primary intended audience is 18 and above. Again, the average attendance, this should look like the other ones. This will calculate the total. Adult programs here. And then there's a couple auto calculations that Bibliostat does for us. It calculates the total number of programs, that's adult, young adult, and children's. And then it calculates the total attendance at those programs here. This is kind of helpful if you look at your totals, you can kind of see how that compares to the year before. These numbers shouldn't be exactly the same. It would be really rare that you had, well, you might have the same number of library programs, that might not change. But your attendance should be fairly close to what you had the year before, but it should vary somewhat from year to year. Then we ask about summer reading programs. And this is actually a question I'm not sure that this is super important to collect. We might, we started collecting this a few years ago. We might look at maybe seeing if we could condense some of this stuff.
I'm sorry, may I interrupt with the question?
Absolutely.
So do we include summer reading programs with the children's programming? And
Yes.
then this is just a little breakout specifically about summer.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
got
So
it.
you would count those in the children's programs, and then we want to know specifically about summer reading programs. And kind of the feedback that I've heard from libraries is, this question is pretty simple. Either you have one or you don't. But the follow-up question here, this is for children, young adults, and adults. Here, if we enter a yes, then the follow-up question is, how many children registered for the program and how many children completed the program? What I've heard from a lot of libraries is they don't really count things that way. They might have a program, where there's, like a meeting once a week, but the children may not attend. People may not attend every week. They might attend 2 or 3 of the sessions. So it's difficult for them to ascertain. They don't really have a registration process, and they don't really have a completion process. So we might just look at participation and condense these 2 questions and say, how many children participated in the program? And then you just report the total number. That's what I've kind of heard from a lot of libraries that do it that way. For now, at least, use your best guess here. If you don't really have a completion and you had 50 children register for the program, just put a 50 here and then a 50 down here as well. that's something that we're looking at maybe in the next year, is condensing this and just asking about participation in the program instead. Again, the same number here. Did you notice here when we entered a yes, that that those other questions disappeared? Follow-up questions disappeared when we enter a no here. So if you enter a yes, then this pops up and says, okay, you've entered a yes here. We want to know how many registered and how many completed. But if you enter a no, it just disappears. It doesn't even ask you a question. So
Less confusion.
hopefully. So I'm going to blank those out for you. And we'll go to the next screen. And that's the same for summer reading for young adults and adults as well. It's a two-part question.
Pardon me.
So let's move on to technology, unless anybody's got any questions about the library services or anything else that we've covered before. So in library technology, we want to know the name of your automation software here. And it looks like last year it was Circe Dynix. I'm not sure if that's the same, but if it was,
Yep.
you just do a control C and a control V and just paste that in there.
Okay.
I've had people ask, why do we want to know the name of your automation system? It comes in handy if you have a new library or somebody that's not been automated in the past and they're looking at new systems. They might want to know what your experience has been with Circe. So they might want to contact libraries in the state that have this as their ILS, or Biblionics, for instance, or Koha.
And I can tell you, and I can tell everyone it gets used because I've used it a number of times this year to answer similar questions.
Sure. So we can kind of put people in touch. They can look at the published data and say, also, what are my neighboring libraries or what are my peer libraries using for their automation system?
I've also used it a couple of times to ask about programming. If I have a library that if there's a piece of software that's only being used by one library, then that's probably not a good candidate to bring in for a program.
Mm-hmm.
But if I've got 20 that are all using it, then I got a little leverage about having them come in and do a training or a information session or something like that.
Sure. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of statistics that are used on this report come from your ILS. And so if you're having issues with pulling those statistics, sometimes if you talk to another director, they can help you with that. Sometimes that might be easier than contacting the vendor. I suppose it depends on the vendor too. So then in 6.2, we want to know if you have public internet access. Looks like last year you did. I'm assuming this year you also did.
Yep.
And then we want to know how many internet computers you have. And as we discussed on Tuesday, you would include in this number, like say you had an iPad or a tablet computer or a laptop computer that circulated in-house, you would include that in this 6.3 as an internet computer that was used by the public. If it was something that circulated from the library that left the library, you wouldn't include it. But if it was in-house circulation, you would include that in this number here, this 15.
I have another question.
Yes.
In our kids department, we have a set of Launchpad tablets. They are not connected to the internet. They're a closed device, but they don't circulate out of the building, but kids can use them in the building. But like I said, they're not connected.
They're not connected to the internet?
Yeah.
They're like an AWE station, or what I would call an AWE station, what we hear.
I'm not sure what AWE.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that acronym is, but that's kind of the definition. You wouldn't include those here.
Okay.
You'd only include them if they were connected to the internet.
Okay, got it.
I think you might be able to count it, depending on the software that's loaded on it. It might count as a database. If it's just straight software, if you're accessing a database online, just to that particular site, you would maybe count that as a database, but I think in your case, it's probably just software that's loaded on those machines locally.
Yep.
You wouldn't include it in the 6.3 here.
Okay.
Okay.
So we do have 2 AWE computers set up in the kids' room as well. Would I count those as databases?
Depends on what the package is that's loaded on there. If it's just a local software that's loaded on to those computers, you wouldn't count that as a database. In some cases, I think some of those workstations, you subscribe to a database and it pulls the information on, from online. That might be counted as a database depending on what it is.
Okay, thank you.
I would check and see. So 6.4, we want to know the name of your internet filtering software. And again, the reason that we ask this is a lot of the time, I think for E-rate funding, you have to have an internet filtering software. So if we had a, like say, for instance, Eric had a new library or a library that hadn't applied for E-rate funding in the past, and they wanted to apply for E-rate funding and they wanted more information about filtering software, he could put them in touch with other libraries within the system, and it would tell the first library what the filtering software was used by others. Like in this case, this is CyberSieve,
Civ.
Civ. Okay. So yeah, they could contact you and say, hey, are you happy with this? How easy is it to use?
Pardon me.
What's been your experience with it? And you could provide feedback to that other library. 6.5, we want to know who your ISP is. Here, it looks like it was CenturyLink last year. We also want to know the type of your primary internet connection. This is from a pull-down list. The common ones are going to be probably DSL cable. We do see some area wireless in some rural areas. Satellite, not too often. Dial-up, not too often these days. I don't think anyone. I don't remember seeing any surveys recently that use dial-up. Fiber optic would be another common one here. If it's not on this list, if what you have is not on this list, just select other and then enter a note. But I think most of these categories cover it. We probably can get rid of dial-up. I don't think anybody's on dial-up these days. We also want to know if you provide Wi-Fi, if the library provides Wi-Fi. So that's either a yes or no question. And then you'll notice here the follow-up question is to report the number of wireless internet sessions logins provided by the library annually. This is a purple question. It's a federal question. There's been a lot of debate about this question because we know that this data is not accurate, at least in our state. It's really difficult to ascertain who's using your Wi-Fi. Like with library visits, you can kind of get a pretty good sample by observing people that come through the door. With wireless internet sessions, it's really difficult to tell because people that walk through your door, sometimes they might have a laptop and you're assuming that they're using that laptop to access the internet, your internet. But sometimes they might not be. They might be using a tablet computer. They might be using a smartphone. They might be outside in the parking lot. They might be using the Wi-Fi after hours in the parking lot. I know with my local library, I've used the Wi-Fi, and every time I go in there now, my phone automatically connects, even though I'm not using the Wi-Fi sometimes. Does that count as a wireless internet session? And the federal definition, you can't see it, but if we click on this little question mark here, it pulls up the federal definition and then some instructions for taking an example that we've provided on there. But this is basically the federal definition here. It says to report the number of wireless internet sessions provided by the library annually. It doesn't give us any guidance as to what a session actually is, what a login actually is, or any of these things. At our state data conference in December, I was having a discussion sitting next to the data coordinator from Kentucky. He said that he had a library that actually was they had a they were getting the information from their router. And what they found was that their numbers were really huge compared to their number of visits. It was way higher than their visits. What they determined after investigating the issue was that,
And Eric Jones here. I
yes,
sent you an email with a new link number to it. So, well, yeah, I think there's
oh, Eric,
there's a confusion.
Eric,
That's all. But anyway, it's now. I just
he doesn't have his headphones on
can we
anymore.
mute him?
So you should check your email. If you
I don't know
have
how.
a problem, give me a call back at 308.
He's almost done.
390.
But anyway, this library in Kentucky, they were next to a stoplight. And so what was happening was that people had used the library and they were driving by, their phone would automatically connect to the Wi-Fi.
While their car was stopped at the stoplight.
You're back, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay. We could hear your call there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had muted my speaker. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's all right. So I always tell people, you know, we know this number's a guess. You know, kind of take a sample, but try not to be creepy about it. You don't need to follow people around to see if they're using the Wi-Fi. There's some libraries that actually ask people, are you going to use the Wi-Fi? That may be a solution. Sometimes you can get this number from your router, depending on the type of router that you have. I know that a lot of people have reported difficulty in doing that. I also recommend, if you want to take a sample, like on my phone, for instance, I have an Android phone, and I've downloaded an app called Fing, F as in Frank, ING. And if I open the app, like we have Wi-Fi in our office here, if I open the app, it'll tell me what other devices are connected to that same Wi-Fi that I'm connected to at a particular time. Now, you can maybe use that to take a sample and say, oh, you know, there's 24 devices connected this morning and 20 different devices connected in the afternoon. That might give you a representative sample on any typical day. And then you can take that and multiply it by 52 to get a yearly average. But like I said, this number is, it's really difficult to collect. And I'm not sure it's really important. I think it's important to note that libraries are providing Wi-Fi. You know, I want to look at the speed. You know, is the speed that you're offering meeting your community needs? This number is always going to be a great big number, regardless, and I'm not sure what it really tells us. So do your best guess with an estimate on this number here. And then 6.9, moving on, we want to know your speed, and there's a speed range here. And I want to try next year to put a link up here to a speed test, so that you can just click on the question mark here and it'll come up with a link to a speed test that you can do to test your speed. Although keep in mind that this number is going to vary. This number is probably going to be different in the morning when there's not a lot of people around, as opposed to maybe in the afternoon when the school kids come in and everybody's using your Wi-Fi. So this is kind of like an average. So if you're taking a sample, you might want to take it at different times during the day. This is also good to know. Sometimes, you know, I've had a lot of libraries do a speed test and they said, well, you know, according to our provider, we should be getting, you know, bless you,
Pardon me.
50 megabits per second, but we're only getting 6. So that's a good time to maybe review that information and say, are we getting the speed that that we're paying for through our ISP? Virtual library visits, this number is going to be pre-filled. I'm guessing that Skylar, your website might be hosted by us.
Yes.
Okay, so for Nebraska Libraries on the Web projects, this number will be pre-filled by us. And you'll notice that this number here is a lot larger than what you had last year.
Yeah.
The reason for that is that this 6.1 is, we've been asking this question for the past 2 years, and we've been pre-filling it with Nebraska Libraries on the Web data. But before, last year, we were filtering for robots and spiders. So So we didn't really think that that was an accurate website visit if we could ascertain that it was a robot or a spider that was visiting your website. It's not an actual person. But the new federal definition doesn't differentiate between that. It says to count everything. So that's why this number is a lot larger than this number, because this number is not filtered for robots and spiders, and the prior year was filtered for robots and spiders. So keep that in mind if you're looking at those numbers and making a comparison from year to year. So then 6.11, I don't know if some of you probably noticed that we started asking these questions, I think last year or the year before. We want to know, basically, do you have these things here? It looks like last year you had entered yes for color printer, large format printers, document scanners, 3D printers. Again, kind of the reason that we want to collect this is maker spaces are becoming more and more prevalent in Nebraska libraries. We want to know, say for instance, if you had a vinyl cutter, then if we publish our data and I get a request from a library asking what other libraries in the state have 3D printers, for instance, and maybe they want to contact them because they're thinking about purchasing one themselves. They might want to know what your experience is with that particular 3D printer, or say providing programs around this technology. It's the reason that we started collecting this data here. Are any of you Innovation Studios libraries? If any of you are, and you're getting that equipment during the grant period, you wouldn't report it here. This is only stuff that you'd have permanently in your library. So if you're part of that temporary rotation, these would all be no unless you had it permanently installed in your library. So keep that in mind. And then 6.12 is kind of a follow-up for 6.11. And you'll notice here again, if you enter a yes here or a no here, if you enter a no, these will disappear down here. If you entered a yes, it wants to know, the follow-up question is, did you provide any training on this equipment? And then it gives you the option of, yeah, we provided a formal program or formal training. Yes, we provided training, but it was done on a one-on-one basis or informal, or we didn't provide any training at all. So those are the follow-up questions to the 6.11. Then the next few categories, we're looking at maybe getting rid of these for next year, because by the time you get to this point of the survey and checking all these yes and no boxes, you get kind of survey fatigued, I think. But these were questions that were asked. I don't know if some of you remember a few years ago, there was a digital inclusion survey that collected data through the University of Maryland. These were questions that were asked on that survey, and I'm not sure that, never received a request for this information, so I think next year we're looking at maybe omitting these questions here. But basically we want to know, did you provide technology training on these sorts of things down here? And these are different than what are up above. You know, using online databases, social media, assistive technology, you know, yes or no questions here. I'm not sure that these are super useful. And then 6.14 is, did you provide training on the category of community civic engagement and e-government related services? You know, hosting community events. 6.15, the same types of questions, but related health and wellness training. Again, this was something that was asked on the digital inclusion survey, so we ripped it off from there. I'm not sure that this is super important. At least I've never had a request for it. Any questions about technology before we move on to staffing? Any opinions about getting rid of those questions?
I have no opinion on that.
No objection, okay. I will say this kind of ties into some of these questions here. There are some states, and there's kind of a push, I think there will be next year, a formal proposal to add a question about meeting room use. We don't currently ask that. A number of states do. That would be a simple, 2 or 3 question. Does your library provide a meeting room for the community? And if so, how many times was it used during the fiscal year? I think that might be important to collect that data, and that's something that we could ask simply. I think a lot of libraries that provide meeting rooms probably collect that data already. Okay, so for staffing, last year we reworked this. On the prior 2 years ago and before that, we had you calculate the FTEs. And so this year we've reworked that so that Bibliostat does the math for us, which I think has been helpful, but it's been kind of a change. So here, in 7.1, you enter the total number of your paid librarians. It looks like last year you had 3. And there is some question as to what do you count as a librarian and what do you count as a non-librarian. And you can't see the thing here, but if you click on that little question mark, it does define a librarian. So even if you have somebody that maybe their official title doesn't include librarian, but say they work the reference desk, I would probably count them as a paid librarian because they're doing library work. The definition says persons who do paid work that usually requires professional training and skill in the theoretical or scientific aspects of library work, distinct from its mechanical or clerical aspect. So again, if you have someone that, like I said, that if they're answering reference questions, if they're doing that type of library work, I would count them as a librarian here, even though maybe that's not in their official title. So here, looks like according to last year, you had 3 total paid librarians. Then you would calculate the number of hours that those 3 people work per year. So say they were all 40-hour-a-week people, you would enter a 120 here like you did last year. Assume all these 3 are full-time. You would enter and I'm just going to enter it and then I'll delete it later just to show you how Bibliostat does the calculation. So Bibliostat then takes that 120 and divides by 40, and then that equates to a 3 for FTEs. Say they worked 100 hours a week, that would be 2.5 FTEs. Yes.
I have a question about part-time. I have an employee who works 20 hours a week. Would I, for total number of paid librarians, would I put 3.5?
No, you would count them as 1 person, so that would be a 4.
Okay.
So you would, yeah, just as, and I've had that come up here, so I think we might look at adding a little definition here to count the total number of people here, because with the FTE calculation here, that's kind of confusing, I think. But no, you would count them as that would become a 4.
Okay.
And then their hours would go down here. So say this went from 3 to 4, and they work 20 hours a week, but your other 3 people were full-time 40 hours a week. So that'd be what, 140? 140 here. That's how you would enter that. So I'm going to take that out because I'm not sure if that's. So then 7.4 is a follow-up. So 7.4 is a subset of these librarians here. So going by last year's data, if you had 3 total paid librarians, looks like 1 of those 3 last year has an MLS degree from an ALA accredited institution. So you entered a 1 here. So you have one person that has an MLS degree on staff and they worked 40 hours a week. So then the feds want to know, how many FTEs you have that have ALA MLS degrees. And then Biblostat will do that calculation just like above. And then in 7.7, this is where you put everybody else, non-librarian paid staff. Sometimes you have bookkeepers, cleaning people, IT person sometime if they don't if they don't have a librarian in their title, they don't work the reference desk regularly, you would maybe count them under 7.7. In larger urban areas, I've had a couple of questions that have came up where they've had maybe an MLS person on staff that was working as an IT person, and their job title wasn't librarian, and there's some confusion on how to count that. Typically, that only happens in larger Omaha and Lincoln libraries.
Sam, on that, like cleaning staff and those, this does not include your contract people.
Right. So if you had contracted persons, and you already included that, in the contract section that we talked about for expenditures, you wouldn't include them here.
So only people that are paid under the library budget as employees.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. That's right. So then Bibliostat calculates that total here in FTEs for your other staff. Looks like you had one person that worked 20 hours. I'm guessing that's the part-time person that you asked about before. So this may get moved. This person may get moved this year up to here for 4 librarians if they're doing library work. And the 20 hours would then become 140. So you might get an edit check on this question if it goes from 1 to 0, and just enter a note saying that a librarian was included in your other staff last year, and you moved them to the librarian part. So then down here.
Okay, so on 7.7, add a note.
You might have to add a note because you might get an edit check on that.
Okay.
I would wait and see until you submit it. If it does come up as an edit check and says, hey, wait a minute, you had half of an FTE last year and you have none this year, what's going on? You can then enter a note at the end and say that last year you counted in the other paid staff this person and what their job title is, and this year you counted them as a paid librarian. Because they typically do library work. So then under 7.11, we want to know about the library director, what the job title is. Library director, your hourly wage. We get a lot of salary requests. We only collect data for directors, but there may be libraries that are looking to hire a new director. They want to look at maybe the salaries in their area or their peer libraries. So we publish that data and make it available. We have had a lot of requests for other salary data, and I was surprised at how many other states collect that. I would think it'd be really difficult to do those comparisons because a youth services director in one location may do totally different work than a youth services director in another location. There are some states that actually collect that data about all their employees, salary data about all their employees. A couple of them, I think, collect it with like a 3-part question, like what's the starting salary, what's the midpoint range, and what's the maximum rate. We just collect it for library directors. We do have salary data that we can pull for you if you're looking for some of that comparison. I do get requests sometimes. There is some ALA data. It's usually by region where we can maybe pull data for you and send it to you if you're looking at, like, I received a request not too long ago from someone that was looking to hire a youth services librarian, and they wanted to know salary data, and we were able to find some of that for Midwestern states. We also want to know how many volunteers you have. Again, this is the total number of people. So it looks like last year you had 16 people that volunteered, and then we want to know kind of the average hours per week. This can be kind of difficult. We know it's an estimate. You might have a lot of volunteers in summer reading that are only there during the summer months. Kind of just do a total calculation and then divide by the number of days that you're open a year to get the annual figure. And then the narrative section here, this is your opportunity to let us know what's going on in your community, maybe some significant programs, events that you've had in the community. A lot of libraries just copy and paste from their annual report that they submit to their city here. This is not a required question. I had a librarian once asked me, they said, the thing that I fret most about is what to put in the narrative. And I said, well, you don't have to put anything. And they thought it was required. And I said, no, it's not required. So if you want to leave that blank, you could. But it's nice for us to know anecdotally kind of what you're doing in your community. And then we get to the certification section. So you would just enter your name here. Typically this is going to be the director. In some cases it might be someone else, like the assistant director. I have a few libraries that have board members enter their data on Biblostat. So what I want to know here is who entered the data here. So if I have questions, I know who to contact to follow up with. And then the title of that person, like I said, board president. Most of the time it's going to be library director. And then the date that you are submitting the survey. So then once all these questions get entered, here's the steps for submission of the survey. So we have step 1, which is the verification of that all questions are answered. You want to review your flagged questions. You want to check your edit checks. Okay. The good news is you can do all those 3 things from one button up here, which is the show status button. So once you have all your data entered, you would then go up here to the show status and find out if you do have any unanswered questions or edit checks. And here, for navigation purposes, this will show the unanswered questions. This will show the edit checks. And then if you had any flagged questions, those would show up over here. So if we go back to the edit checks, if it loads, and we have had libraries reporting with the new collect that they've gotten error codes in the edit checks. If anything like that happens, let me know and I'll pass it on to Bibliostat. It's a good idea to let me know what browser you're using at the time. The good news is with the new version of Collect, it's now compatible with Chrome, but we've had more reports of error codes with Firefox under the new version that didn't happen in the old version. So because we're one of the early libraries that's using the new Collect, if we can provide them with any feedback on error codes, let me know and I'll pass it on to them. So here, if you notice under the edit checks, we've got one here for the FSCS definition. I'm guessing this is probably because we haven't entered the staffing information. One of the requirements for FSCS to be a public library under that federal state cooperative services agreement is that you have to have paid staff. And so I'm guessing that because we haven't entered that yet, this is why this edit check has came up here. We talked about this Tuesday. You've had a large change in your revenue here. So that did come up as an edit check. And this gives you an explanation. It says, you've had a large change from last year. Please check this data and see if it's correct. And if it is correct, they want to know what explains that large change. And so in this case, I'm not sure what that explanation actually would be, but it's possible that it could be that you got a large chunk of money from the city this year.
Yeah, because we built the new library, so they had budgeted for that.
So if that's the case, what you can do is just enter a note down here, and you can enter it right in here. Enter under the federal field, since this is a federal question. And it would be something simply like, we built a new library, and the city allocated large something like that. That just explains, why this large change occurred. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I'll let you enter however you want to describe that. Then the other thing that it looks at here is it's looking at your operating revenue and your operating expenditures, and it's saying that that ratio is either higher or lower than expected. So you might want to go back to your survey and say, hey, what was my total operating revenue? If it was $500,000 and you only reported 200,000 in expenditures, then there probably were some expenditures that didn't get reported. So it's looking at that ratio of revenue to expenditures, and it's saying it's outside of a certain range. Those numbers will never be exact. Don't try and get them exact. We don't want them to be exact. But if there's a large change or a large difference between the two, that'll trigger an edit check here. Looks like you got a edit check for capital revenue too. Again, that's the note here is likely going to be we built a new library. That's why we got this large amount of money compared to last year. Same thing with the expenditure as well down here. See here, we entered a note in the survey. We built a new facility. That was why we had this large expenditure. And you see how this edit check is now green? That means this is good to go. That's what we need. We need an explanation. So for all these red ones, you won't be able to submit your survey until you enter notes in all those fields. And once those are all green, then you'll be able to submit your survey. Because it'll want to know, it just wants to know, why that data is outside of a certain range. Again, here we haven't entered this, so it's flagging this as an edit check because it's saying your books last year are the same as this year. So this came up because it's exactly the same.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, we haven't entered it yet. So you'll see those, and then you can enter notes here, or you can go back to the survey and enter the notes. And since we have a lot of them, because we haven't completed the survey, you can then, once you enter your notes here, you can just click on Save, and it'll save these notes, and all of these should turn green. Okay? And once those turn green, then you can go and look at your unanswered questions, and you can look at your flagged questions if you want. Assuming you don't have any of those, you can go ahead and hit Submit. I'm going to just do this. It's not going to let me submit it because we've got edit checks. But if you tried to do that, the system will say, wait a minute, you don't have any flagged questions. Those are good here, but you've got required questions that must be answered, and you've got edit checks here. So when you get those issues resolved, if you had answered all your questions and passed your edit checks, there'll be another button down here that says all these will be green, and it'll say Submit Survey. And you can go ahead and click on that, and it'll submit it. So this is a two-part, 2 clicks here. You click on this, and then if everything looks good here, then you click on it once more to submit it. Once you submit your survey, I get an automatic email from Biblostat saying, like in this case, if you submitted your survey today, I would get an email that said Schuyler Public Library submitted their survey, and it will show me the date and the time that it was submitted. And typically what the process is then is what I'll do is go back in and look over your survey, and I'll look over your notes. Sometimes with common things, we submit all of our state's data to IMLS in the spring. So after the survey period is over with, I'll compile all that data and submit it to them. I kind of know on their end, if they ask questions, kind of how we can clean up notes when surveys are submitted so that they don't ask us questions later on, so that we have a decent note in there that explains changes for the edit checks. And if everything looks good on your survey, then you'll get an email from me with a thank you note, and a link to our supplemental survey. And let me see if I can share that here too, but we'll go back here and answer any questions. If your survey does have issues, I'll usually contact by email and say, hey, I noticed this, I noticed that. I won't make any changes to your survey, but once you submit your survey, it's locked to you, so you won't be able to log back in. So if there's changes that need to be made, I can either unlock your survey and you can go back in and make those changes, or typically it's something minor like you know, can I change this note to something like this, because that would avoid questions later on from my MLS. So we can communicate by email that way, and then maybe make changes if they need to be made. I'd like to show you the supplemental survey here, because that's the next part of this. But does anybody have any questions or anything about any of the previous parts for like Tuesday?
Pardon me.
Or if you don't have a mic, maybe use the chat box.
I haven't seen anything in the chat box.
Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is you can also print here. Once your survey is locked and submitted, you can print at any time. Like I said, if you go up to that survey list, you can print any prior year survey here. If you have an issue with Bibliostat, we save. Once your survey is submitted, I also save a copy locally on our network, just in case something would happen to Bibliostat. We have a backup copy. So I do save a copy of that. Let me see if I can share the screen for the supplemental survey here. Does everybody see our website there? Should look familiar, our main page. Okay,
Yep.
so when you when your survey is finalized by us, I'll send you an email with a link to the supplemental survey. You can also type in supplemental survey here. No, let me show you one other thing. If you lose your password, you can always contact me or the reference desk here at the commission for your password. And like I said earlier, the password for your Bibliostat login is the same ID and password that's used for the supplemental survey. And it's the same ID and password that's used for your accreditation application. So you have one ID and password for all three of those things. But if you were, say, working on your survey over the weekend and there's nobody at the commission and you lost your password, there is a password, I think it's lookup. Yeah, so down here, there's a Bibliostat password ID lookup where you can go and enter your city here. So say Stacy was working on her survey or accreditation application on the weekend and lost her password. She could enter Albion and then hit submit, and it'll send an email to the director's email that we have on file. And that's automatically generated, so I think that happens fairly quick. That's one thing to keep in mind. If you can't get a hold of us here, you can always do that lost password lookup, and it'll email it to you. So for the supplemental survey, like I said, there'll be a link in the thank you email, and basically what we want to know in the supplemental survey, a lot of the information, I think there's I think I can log in as a test library here. I'm going to try. Yeah, so Vern set up a test library here. So this is what it'll look like when you log in. Basically, a lot of this information are things that automatically feed into our website. So like for your library hours, for instance, we publish those on our website. So what we want you to do is at least once a year, you can, if this information changes, you can always log in at any time and check this data and update it. It's like if your staffing changed, your board changed, your hours changed, internet services changed, you can log in at any time. But we like to have you at least check this once a year. And I think that's a requirement of your accreditation application, is that you complete this supplemental survey. It's usually a good time to, once you submit the other public library survey, that's when we send the reminder to have you look over this information and make sure that what we have is up to date. Again, this is going to be a lot easier than the other one. You would just enter, the name of the person, the address. If it was a library director, you would check that. And then at the bottom, this is to submit. And I also get an email. Let's see. I also get an email, and you'll notice here there's a green check mark there showing that you've completed that portion, that section. I also get an email when this is done, so then we check you off the list. So we don't keep sending you emails. Any questions about the supplemental survey?
Would be nice down there on the photos. Some of the photos are kind of long in the tooth. And I think like
Yeah.
Jenny, your new, I don't know if you haven't done it yet, but your new library, it'd be nice to have new ones in there.
Yeah, so
I don't have any photos of it, of the building, because we didn't have a lawn for the longest time. I
Yeah.
do have a nice photo of our new marquee,
Hmm.
or our new building sign, which
Yeah.
I've been using for everything.
Well, I'm just, it's a general comment. I didn't mean to be picking on you, but the
No,
point of it
no worries.
is that we've got some that are pretty, I think I saw one in there, somebody had like 02.
yeah, and that's one of the things that we've looked at on our end too, because this photo here is the one that rotates on the main page here. I think it's different every day. But if you go to our website here, like you can pull up the entry for Schuyler Public Library. There's actually a link to photos here. You know, that's from 2001. These are from 2001 as well. And then there's also a link to historic photos here. This is probably from Nebraska Memories. So yeah, those are maybe things that might need to be updated. And that was kind of the source of discussion too, because typically we like to have library photos that have people, where you have people in the library. Like these are really good photos here. But maybe getting releases from these people may be difficult. That may be the issue with a lot of libraries is if they have a photo with 20 people in there, they have to have 20 of them sign a release, or that may become an issue. So that may be challenging. But this is the page that the supplemental survey information feeds into. Obviously here, this is stuff that's comes from the public library survey, but links to your Facebook page, Twitter, other social media, your hours, that's all comes from the supplemental survey, board and foundation, that type of thing. So I want to show you one more thing. So after usually in the spring, after we submit all of our data to IMLS, right before the accreditation application process starts, we publish our data on our website. And so if you want to look at the entire published data, you can. Typically this comes in handy, like if you're comparing your numbers to what we would call a peer library,
Pardon me.
a neighboring library, a library that's similar to yours. There's a link to it over here under library management and then statistics. But I always find it easier to use the search box. I just type in data services. And that gets you to the main data page here. And if you'll notice here, there's a link to the survey here. There's also a link to the data that we've published. This is the most current data. It's from 2017. We publish it in an Excel format or a CSV. We also kind of provide these summaries. We look at some service measures in the state, what we call this data dashboard, where we look at some trends. This is the entire state data. Summarize, all these sorts of things, and provide a couple of charts that sometimes are helpful. Like here, what we're seeing is that circulation of electronic materials is consistently rising, and the cost is going down. So the cost per circulation is lower than it was in 2013. Program attendance is going up, trending up. One thing to keep in mind, I get a lot of requests from libraries that just want to look at their peers. They want to look at the data that's used on the accreditation application just for their particular peers. And I have the back-end data for that. I think when you log into your accreditation application, it just gives you the peer median and mean. If you want to look at all those numbers and compare and see if there are any anomalies, see how your library compares to each and every peer, you can always contact me and I'll pull that data and send it to you in an Excel form. Sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes there's peers that come from Iowa, and you might want to look at the Iowa peer data in a more specific way. Just contact me and I can pull that spreadsheet and send it to you. I think that's about it. Are there any questions?
I'm okay.
Good. Well, if there are questions that arise when you're doing your survey, or like I said, any error codes that come up with the new version of Collect, let me know. You can always call me or email me if you have specific questions about what to report where, or anything else that comes up. Feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much for your expertise and your information.
Oh, you're very welcome.
A couple of thank yous out there on the chat box, Sam.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then I'll close this down. And I didn't get the last session recorded as quickly as, or up on the site as quickly as I can, or I was able to in the past. I'll probably be tomorrow before I get that up there. So I'll have them both from Mondays and today's probably tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
Bye.
Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.